Welcome to the IEE Caucus Annual Meeting, and business meeting. We just have a few things to talk about, and then I want to save all the time for our guest speaker, Fani. So let's get started. So for those of you who don't know, the IEE Caucus is made up of supporters of the Alliance for Community Media who are dedicated towards enhancing the inclusiveness of the organization, providing fair and equal engagement for everyone. The IEE Caucus serves to make recommendations to the ACM Board of Directors on policies and practices to ensure that no one is marginalized or diminished within the organization. Today, you are attending the Caucus Business Meeting, which takes place at the National Conference each year. We also conduct monthly task force meetings, generally by conference call. The IEE Caucus is open to all members of the ACM, and we welcome your participation in your share for concerns and suggestions. I'm happy to report that, to you that the caucus has worked on assisting in the ACM mentoring program, creating ideas to increase membership, made a financial contribution to the Emerging Leader Institute, which took place earlier this week, just prior to the conference. We suggested a success and recruited today's remarkable speaker, Ifani Bell, from Open Signal. The caucus has updated a resource guide, which is available for download on the IEE section of the ACM website. The group routinely performs an annual review of the caucus operating procedures, which was started 2.5 years ago. And it's our kind of guide to operating the caucus. You will also notice that we will be reinstating the ACM Facebook page so we can share ideas with the membership. The caucus meets the fourth Thursday of each month at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and we invite all of you to take part and join us, to join us. I also want to let you know that we just recently held our election of officers for the next year, and I'm happy to announce that the IEE has elected Jackie Stephen as Secretary Treasurer, myself, Barbara Chisholm, as the IEE representative to the National Board, and we had a tie for vice chair between Jay Robertson and Ian Thies, and I will be serving as the IEE chair for the next year. So if anybody has any questions, I would like to, otherwise I'm just going to get in and introduce Fani, so he has plenty of time to share his information.
Quick business question. Do you want any more information I was on the sign-in sheet other than just name only?
Email address would be
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah, oh, you passing it around, yeah, exactly, thank you. So today, I'm actually, Sabrina, I think, has some information that she would like to share about the Digital Equity Act. So Sabrina, you want to take a couple of minutes before I introduce Stefani about?
Okay.
Okay?
Sure.
All right.
Our allies with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance have put together an act with Patty Murray's staff that would give a big chunk of money, like $125 million each year for 5 years to states for state digital equity planning. Because we know we've got states that are doing some work on broadband, just plain in broadband, but none of the digital equity work. And then it would be another roughly $125 million for programs, like maybe programs that you do at your stations that are digital equity and community media programs. This will all be administered by NTIA. Hopefully it won't get smushed into being an FCC thing, which could happen. But right now it needs Republicans. So it's got a bunch of Democrats. We just had to call about it. Sorry I'm late. Is that enough information?
I think that's fine.
Come to me for
Anybody
more.
wants
If you
to know,
Republicans, let me know.
if anybody wants to know more about it, they can talk to you privately.
Thank you, Barbara.
Okay, you're welcome. So today I am happy to introduce Ifani Bell. He is an award-winning visual storyteller and producer for Portland, Oregon. As an undergraduate, at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, and thought his early interest was in dramatic narrative. Fani was significantly influenced by the school's well-established narrative nonfiction film program. After graduating, Ifani began his professional career in Boston, Massachusetts, as an intern for the local productions producing some of the earliest web-based video content produced by public media back in 2003. After leaving WGBH, Ifani initiated what would become a decade-long career serving a variety of PBS and NPR stations across the country, helping to develop journalistic online video storytelling platforms and producing television and radio programs. In 2014, he left public media and became the founder and co-director of the Brushfire Creative Partners, a socially sustainable creative market agency dedicated in supporting and developing equity in the creative and social marketplaces that have become inseparably linked in the modern cultural and creative economy. It wasn't until 2016 that he finally joined Open Signal, where he conceived of his creative initiative supporting an equity-based filmmaking fellowship centered around developing the experience and expertise of local African-American creatives in Portland. In addition to his professional pursuits, Ifani is an accomplished photographer, cyclist, and father, but not necessarily in that order. He is currently based out of his hometown of Portland, Oregon. I, without any further ado, welcome Ifani Bell.
That was weird hearing all that out loud. I remember. I think I wrote that at some point, but still weird hearing it out loud. I'm going to apologize kind of off the bat because I'm kind of new to the ACM world, and I don't understand all the ins and outs of that of how it functions. I've sort of been learning as I go along. As Barbara mentioned, for most of my life, I've been in the sort of PBS public media world, which I think, in a certain way, has sort of gotten me to where we are, and gotten me to where I am career-wise, but not necessarily for the better. I think the reason why I left the sort of PBS world is because I didn't feel like what was happening in those environments were reflective of my own experience and the experience of other people like me. And it wasn't for lack of trying, which I think is a kind of a hard thing to say. But in reality, I didn't really have a choice. It's interesting, how many people here were in the previous session, the plenary session? Great. Because a lot of the things that were said during that session, I think, were about, in a certain sense, about equity. And I think that from being a part of that world in a certain way, I think in the bio, I think I mentioned that I was journalistic. Like I was a journalist, but I wasn't a journalist, and I feel like I couldn't, in good conscience, be a journalist, because I think that compromised my ability to tell the truth of who I am, and the truth of how I felt. And so I left that thinking that I would have a better opportunity to tell stories in a different way that were not necessarily fiction, but based on a different kind of truth. And I think when you look at the kind of storytelling that I think as a young person I initially sought to become a part of, I think that the stories that are representative of that sort of fictional environment, the Hollywood stories, the documentary stories that we see promoted and presented on television and in film, I think those stories are also representative of a truth. And I think that truth is, whether or not it's deemed fiction, is based on a certain person's perspective. And there's certain ideas about perspective are what informs the populace, informs people. And so at the end of the day, when you look at journalism and when you look at filmmaking and storytelling, what we're really talking about is the record. We're talking about history, what people look back on, what people refer to, what future generations refer to in terms of where they come from. And so journalism and storytelling and art, we all have a responsibility because those endure longer than we do as individuals. So in a roundabout way, I I began work at Open Signal because I was granted an opportunity to address those things. And when Justin Harn, who is the executive director at Open Signal, approached me about working with the organization, he asked me what I wanted to do. And at that point, because I know a lot of, it's interesting because in the earlier session, 2014 and 2015 were very pivotal moments, not just in I think everywhere. And I hear a lot of the stories sort of begin with in 2014, or this happened, or in 2015, an organization went this way, or we came together to do this. And I think very similarly, like a lot of where I am now started around that time too. And I think largely it was because we were, or for me at least, is because we were beginning to see in front of us on television and on cell phones, we were seeing a truth that we hadn't recognized before, I think as a broad population. I think seeing the lives of young African-American men get snuffed out at the hands of law enforcement was a significant transition point for all of us, not just for the African-American community, but for everyone. And I think that, so when Justin asked me what I wanted to do, I said, I want to do something that helps to share that story, to share that truth, and also begin to correct that narrative about what we're seeing, and about the impacts, the things that lead us to the point where populations are struggling for their very lives. Also interesting, in the session from this morning, we're talking about the immigrant and migrant crisis and the channels through which different people were trying to communicate with each other. And there's all very novel ideas about how we communicate through old school technologies like the phone and using WhatsApp. Those are novel ideas that I think are important for sharing information, but they're also keys to survival. They're not just these mechanisms through which we use to, and one thing I was thinking about, I was like, these are very, very necessary, and my thought was, I hope we don't, at some point, have someone paying someone to advertise on those channels. That's the thing that's where my mind went. And my thought was like, well, let's just let these things grow. Let them continue to serve their, by definition, grassroots purpose, which is to help a community survive by telling their stories and sharing their stories. I think this is the role of journalism, and I think this is also the role of storytelling in film and other mediums as well. So that's a long way to get us to the point where we decided to create something called Open Signal Labs. So Open Signal Labs is, it's a bunch of different things. And I think this slide presentation that I have here was something that I used at the launch of our Black Film Fellowship program, I think about a year and some change ago, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. So you have a lot of for-profit companies create these small research and development arms. They call them laboratories, they call them think tanks to deal with sort of new and engaging ideas that their company needs to address in some way, but they haven't quite figured out how. So we kind of adopted that model and said, all right, let's use Open Signal as an opportunity to explore, and the resources that we have there, to explore different ways to cultivate community and to rally around some of the changes that Open Signal was going through since its sort of switch from Portland Community Media to what's now Open Signal. And so when Justin asked me what I wanted to do, I said I wanted to, given that this was, 2016, 2015, 17, in that kind of era, I was like, I want to tell stories about Black people, by Black people, and for Black people. Not just because I thought it was, well, for a variety of different reasons. One, because at the time, we had mass market media sort of demanding these kinds of things. We're beginning to recognize the value of them. We saw large distributors and companies taking risks on content in ways that I felt like maybe weren't taken in previous years. And then we saw successes of that content. And I hate to use, Black Panther, but Black Panther is a strong example of content that is created in some way by, for, and about African Americans, albeit a fantastical and fictionalized way. But the point wasn't just that it was designed in this particular fashion. The point was it made $1 billion. and more. Like it broke all kinds of records and so on and so forth. And that I think that then kind of opened up the floodgates for a market who were saying, all right, we want the next Black Panther. I don't know what happened. So I'm like, all right, if this is something that the market wants, let's see if they put their money where their mouth is. So what we set out to do was sort of not necessarily start out to change the world initially at first, but we started to look at where we were in our own community. OpenSignal is situated in the heart of what is historically an African-American community that has been under pressure since its inception, since the beginning of the African-American community here in Portland. Forces of urban growth, gentrification, whatever you want to call it, have been severely impacting the neighborhood. I grew up in that neighborhood. One of the stories I like to tell a lot, and for better or for worse, is that I used to go by OpenSignal or Portland Community Media at the time as a child every day of school and never knew it was there. I never, as a person who was interested in filmmaking and television and so on and so forth, I didn't realize that that resource was there. And so part of what we're doing at OpenSignal Labs is not just to address sort of these market forces in a global way, but to impact what's going on in our community locally and be responsive to the history of what's going on in that community, of which I am very much a part of. So OpenSignal Labs began in 2016, and I think the point of it, so what we decided to do, when I said I wanted to create content for, by, and about African Americans, I was expecting Justin to push back a little bit, because when I was in, these public media spaces at PBS, at OPB and HYY and KQED, like attempts to do that were met with interest. Because I think that people recognize the value and the importance of community and culture, but the willingness to sort of put emphasis and resource behind those efforts was always met oftentimes at the 11th hour with a certain amount of resistance. So when Justin sort of said, okay, how do you want to do that, I was a little bit surprised. I wasn't expecting him to kind of take me up on that offer. And so I began to say, all right, we're going to need tons of money. We're going to need, if we're going to be working in film, we're going to need cameras, we're going to need space, we're going to need people. And so he said, okay. Got connected with Rebecca Burrell, who's in the audience here today. And so we set up to the work of applying to find money and so working with the local foundations here in town and the MHCRC to get the money. And then and I'm thinking, all right, cool, this is happening. And I'm kind of still a little bit skeptical. And then the money starts coming in, and it's like, oh shit, we got to do this. So this is all very new to me to have an organization be so responsive to this. And mind you, OpenSignal is also going through a transition. And so this transition to working on this kind of work is intrinsically linked to the organization's identity in a broad way. Not that this is going to be the only initiative that defines OpenSignal, it's just one of them. And so OpenSignal Labs, in this description, I don't talk about film, I don't talk about anything specifically, because I don't want to, hamstring OpenSignal Labs into focusing simply on cinema, which is something we happen to be focusing on now as a pilot, which we've just finished. We finished a pilot year of working with 6 Black filmmakers here in Portland who have, and sort of hoping to cultivate the creative development, working on films that they want to work on, developing a cohort of support, and helping to create a pipeline to career opportunities locally and nationally, or wherever we can find to place them or get them connected with. And so just I think maybe it was 3 weeks ago, we kind of culminated this first pilot year with a screening at the Hollywood Theater, where we sold out 480-seat theater with their works in progress and a presentation about emerging media and the importance of investing in equity and culture in not just film and storytelling, but also in emerging media like VR and digital spaces. Which was a huge success. And I'm not sure how well you guys know Portland, but Portland's a very unique environment And I think all the fundraising efforts, I think all of the interest is in what it is we're doing is not a surprise to me. But I think the embrace of this idea is, I think, in some way related to Portland's unique environment and this sort of broad understanding of the value of cultural specific content. So, whoops, of course. All right. So, like I said before, very briefly, the goals of this particular cinema fellowship, of which this is the first initiative of Labs, was to do these kind of things. I think I talked about that a little bit. But this one I think is really important, and this is kind of what relates to the conversation about journalism that happened earlier today, is that one thing that I want to do is to create a better representation of myself, which is something that I don't get a chance to see very often, which is to create a context around which other people can see the broad range of personality, character, and identity of Black people. And I think that's I think that's a byproduct of something like Black Panther. I don't know that Black Panther was designed to do that. I don't think it was designed necessarily to help young Black men sort of learn about themselves. I don't think that was the studio's goal, but I think it definitely was a side effect. And I think that's a good thing. I tell a story about my young daughter who is biracial. Her mother is Polish and I'm Black, and she's a product of that. And these days, there's tons and tons of content. If you look at children's television that is focused around young, biracial or ethnically ambiguous children as characters. And I tell people that I don't think that these executives at companies were thinking that they wanted to help develop and foster the identity of young biracial African-American girls. They wanted to make sure that those young African-American girls were asking their parents to buy them the products that are associated with those television programs. And so as much as I want the world to change in a way that says, all right, we need to do this because we want to do those kind of things for people, I am left with the reality that I have to accept the fact that we're getting the byproduct of it. And I think maybe one day we'll get to the point where corporate executives are interested in those kinds of things, but that's not the world we live in today. And so part of what I want to do is to sort of be a part of that. And that we're not going to be a part of it unless we have people who are telling their own stories. And so that's really the point of this, is to develop this cohort. And I think this is we had 6 this year in this pilot project. We're going to have 6 more. And so that will be 12 in 2020, and then in 2020 maybe we'll get tons more money, and then we'll have a cohort of 24. And so I think the point is, after a while, we'll have people who have the ability to tell their own story, and tell their own story with in a technically proficient and high quality manner, that people in larger, broad audiences will accept, appreciate, and that distributors will want to distribute. And then the result of that, both in the community, is not just that we're developing career opportunities for those people who are developing the content, and then we're not just sort of supporting the community in the sort of receiving of those positive ideas or broad ranges of ideas, but we're helping to sort of, it's a holistic thing in the sense where it's like, they say the rising tide lifts all boats. That's kind of the point of that, is that it will help this entire community. Oh, and I didn't mention that the projects that the fellows were working on this year, in this pilot project, the stories that they were working on were a mix of documentary, sort of narrative, music video, experimental sort of theater, hybrid type things. They're all sort of cinema focused, but the subject matter was tied in some way to this geographic area, Portland or the Pacific Northwest, in some way. Characters, ideas, experts, all those things had some connection with the Pacific Northwest. The idea being that a different narrative of this community, and if you know Portland very well, is very white. It is it has been that way for a long time. And I think that the stories that come out of the Pacific Northwest are always seen through that lens. And I think that it was important to me, for someone who grew up here and had a different experience that is often not shared in broader mainstream culture, I wanted to give other people the opportunity to shape that narrative for broader audiences to see. So the content that comes out of here not only has an opportunity for these people to shape a cultural narrative of this particular place, but in a sense, I think it's almost like a counter-narrative in a way. So I think that was and I think it presents a very large opportunity to define the Pacific Northwest in a way that has not been done before. And I think it's almost like, I think that reality and that opportunity is almost like a commodity. You know, if you have a narrative coming out of a particular place for a very long time that represents something that's similar, or it becomes sort of stale and staid until people desire or crave something new and something different. And I think part of what we're doing here is cultivating something new and something different. So the cohort model, working on group and individual products, and all this stuff is a pilot year. So none of this, like it's good that I'm seeing it here and it still matches up with what we did, which is great. But all this stuff is we were just trying it out. And I had no idea how to do any of this stuff. Remember, all I wanted to do was tell stories about black people, by black people, and for black people. I didn't want to do anything else. And what came of it was this. I think we did most of this, right? Rebecca, we did it? Right, we did. So how do we do it? We work with some great partners with ABS, Advanced Broadcast Systems, who are now, they're something else, but they're awesome. And so if we're going to create great content that people are going to be looking at and people want to see and will value, we got to use the right stuff. So we felt that, the Vericam platform was the right value to quality of proposition that we could offer. And they've been great, but the point is a lot of programs that develop black filmmakers in certain communities come from this sort of deficit approach where we got to use exactly what it is, what's available. And I don't believe in that. I think first of all, the act of making films isn't very hard, which is I know people hate when I say that in a lot of ways, but you set up a camera, you point at something, you get great people around them, and they make stories, which is great, and it's kind of magical in a way. But if you don't, it's important to be able to use the right tools to get that done. So I think, that's what we've done here. The point is we don't want to give people handy cams. I think a lot of organizations, I think, are in the right place. It's you get what you can, and you make the best, you do the best you can with what you have, right? And that's real, but if we're gonna do the kind of thing that I think I wanna do, that I envision in my head, it's really cool to work on cell phones and create stories, but at the end of the day, so I mean, that's what I gotta say about that. So, again, I'm not saying, I'm not criticizing any other programs that are doing that. I think that in this particular case, this particular experiment, this is what's required. I wanted to, ideally, I think the first budget proposal that I wrote was give me 5 Alexa LFs. That's what I want. And after that was going to cost $1 million, I was all right, give me some Vericams, which is not a dig on Vericam. These are very great cameras. But the point is, that's more pictures of it. That's not the exact camera that we're using. That's a sort of higher up, beefed up model, but that's the point that says that we mean business. And I think what's also interesting is the impact that this kind of investment has on the people that you're working with. When you value the people that you're working with and you want to give them the highest quality content, I think it does a couple of things. It empowers the people who you're working with to be oh, wait, they shot Master of None on this? I was yeah. They shot 13 Reasons Why on this? Let's get down to business. Let's do this. So yeah, that's kind of Orange is the New Black, which I have issues with, but whatever. That's my favorite show. If anybody has seen Ozark, that's great. And the cool thing, I say this a lot because and this is gonna maybe sound superficial, but Ozark has a geographic sort of setting that is very similar to the Pacific Northwest in terms of how its story is told. And that's kind of and when I saw the show, I was the first thing I thought was, oh, wow, this is and so I looked at, when I found out it was shot on the Vericam, I was we can do that here, And so knowing that I didn't want to sell myself short or sell the program short, that was another reason why. It wasn't just a budgetary decision to get the Vericams, it was also a creative one. Again, sort of, this again was from the beginning, and I think we've gotten a lot more support since then. And I think the reason why we've gotten so much more support since then is because, like I said before, we mean business. And I think, it's almost as if you got to spend money to make money. At this point, we're not necessarily making money, but I do anticipate that since we're just a year in and I'm considering this like a 0 year, like we haven't even gotten started yet. And so I feel like the screening that we had a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago now, it was representative of some of the work. And I think we haven't sort of gotten that work out beyond the screening yet to share with other people, and I think part of that's intentional for a lot of different reasons. But the point is, I just wanted to give people enough to say that we mean business and we're competitive. I think there is, and one thing I'm learning about sort of all the community stations that have, that are popped up around the country, I think we're still being burdened by an old reputation of what community media is. And so this program, I think, is wrapped up in that. I think we want to be able to signal to other people that we can do more. We can aspire to a higher technical standard. This is not to devalue the content that we're already creating. That was a big message at the beginning of this program, at the launch of this program, is not to say that we are abandoning our legacy users and community members. But this is, again, the whole point of this equity initiative is to use opportunities like this to build the entire station. I say station, to build the entire studio, to build the entire community, to build the entire what we're calling community arts center, or whatever we're sort of morphing into at this particular point. I don't know how much time I have, but I do much better answering questions.
It's 11:30.
Okay, so what does that mean?
15 minutes?
So I know there's something that I should maybe close on. I'm trying to figure out, because there's so much more to talk about, and I think the one thing that I want to say, I think I mentioned a few minutes ago, was that we're not making money yet, but I think the investment in what it is that we're doing, I think it's going to take some time. Creating art and working on the kinds of films that we're working on aren't things that sort of come up overnight. I think what we do now is an investment in the future, and I think that there was earlier this morning, I think the woman from Chicago was talking about how we were licensing, there's a potential for stories to eventually sort of be sold, and that money then comes back to the organization. My goal, thinking the way that I'm thinking, is that if one of these documentaries, if one of them is distributed in some kind of mainstream channel or is picked up by a distributor locally or nationally, that money comes back to the program. That supports another year, of our funding for the organization. I think that's part of the dream, is that an organization focused on the development of African-American filmmakers, creating content that becomes valuable enough to support the entire organization. That's a revolution, I think. I think that's a signal for a lot of different organizations to sort of look at how they're prioritizing their content and showing a little bit of, with the right support, with the right people, there are opportunities to grow your organization beyond what you might think you're capable of. And so if there are any questions about, there's a gentleman in the back here, I'm not sure how to facilitate it, but feel free to ask them now, I think. Yes?
I have two questions. One about the cameras that you're using. Were you purchasing or renting or donating? Were they donated?
So this was there's something that I say at the organization a lot, which is we got to do more than one thing at one time. Because I think right now, if you ask me if we had everything that we needed, I say absolutely not. I think that partnerships are very important, and I think that we have purchased the cameras that we have, and this is really cool, actually. So our organization has, we're all telling stories in a certain way at the organization. Within the labs and within the broader organization, there are community members who are working on telling stories, and the resources that are used to tell those stories, there's a lot of overlap, right? So there's, I think ideally, and we're still trying to figure out where the overlap ends and begins, but that's the cool thing, because I can't use the cameras that are in general sort of circulation they're not gonna get the job done, but they may have scrims and gels and lights that we can use, because a light is a light at the end of the day. I mean, some lights are better than others, but let's be serious, a light is a light. And so I think part of our ability to do this kind of hinges upon working with other departments within the organization to both save money and create efficiency. And also create awareness of what it is we're doing in the organization, and buy-in within our staff members and our community. And because I remember what I said before, well, this is not a challenge to our legacy, community members. This is an opportunity for people to sort of to coalesce around a single idea. Yes. Yes. Oh wait. Oh, you asked if we were renting stuff. So yeah, we rented some equipment, but not the cameras. And so part of the problem with filmmaking is that it's expensive. Because when it's expensive, when you have to rent something, you become accountable to someone else in a certain way. And that accountability, I'm not thinking that we're going to completely eschew that, but it restricts in a way. And so I think that, like, best case scenario, we would use our resources and only our resources, because that allows us to make choices that are based on our own decisions and not someone else's timeline. Because that's always the push and pull with art, is that you're always beholden to something. But in this particular case, in this very specific, culturally specific case, that dynamic is violent. And so I think what was important for me is to, and I'm still sort of working with this, is how much do we cooperate? How much do we work with in terms of these partnerships that we develop? And even if it's like a rental agreement, I mean, all that stuff I'm looking at as potentially, I'm analyzing it and looking at it on a case-by-case basis. But yes, so we have the benefit of having good partners. I think we're still developing relationships, but this is very early on, and I think that this pilot year is an opportunity to test and evaluate how we work with people, what we rent, not just what we rent, but what people loan us. That's a whole different kind of thing. Because that begins questions about, like, who we owe or all that kind of thing, and who we have to pay back and who gets to do what. And Rebecca can talk a lot about our conversations about how that works. But we have to do two things at one time: continue to sort of work on this sort of self-determination angle, and also begin to figure out how to develop support. And that's something that we can't, we have to kind of keep an eye on at all times. Yes.
Just to add to that, so one of the things in Portland is that the grants that Open Signal received from the Cable Regulatory Commission are tethered to capital. They can, for the most part, only be spent on something that you can legitimately call a capital expenditure. So perhaps there would have been different decisions made, except that was all that the money could be spent on. So just to kind of put a practical,
thank you. Yeah.
Piece.
I don't know anything. Yes.
Have you guys thought about web series? Mostly because there's a project at Chicago called Open TV that maybe you're familiar with. I think there's a similar approach to mentality of our King Christian. It's like his baby, and he's anchored it out of Northwestern University because he's a professor there. But the idea is that, like, there are stories that should be told in centering non-white folks, and so he's been. Brown Girls is like the most famous series that came out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just something.
Yeah, no, series production, not just web series, but like, Netflix series, TV series, episodic content is something that I think would be ideal to our fellowship sort of curriculum program, because it allows for ongoing production that will support fellowship work. That's something that I think has been sort of hand in hand with my sort of original idea, and we're at present sort of looking at how to establish sort of episodic work as a platform. Because then you have opportunities to have different directors work on things, people play different roles, different writers, and so that's like something that I think is very much in the front of mind.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting how it's thought to produce how to fundraise for projects. Usually it's slower, it's less overhead, right?
Yeah, we need to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, because there's a lot of like synchronicity about that. We've already targeted you, by the way. So, yes, other questions if there are. I saw a couple of more hands up front here, and then we'll go to the back.
It's funny because I'm with Brick Media in Brooklyn,
Yes.
and we're doing similar things in that, like, we have like a documentary cohort, and we did like a black box theater thing. One of the things I think is interesting here is I see the Portland Film Office,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a small relationship with the mayor's film office, but it's not a relationship where they're necessarily supporting our programs. And I see this, and it intrigued me. So I guess my question would be, one, is your relationship with the Portland Film Office, was it always there, or was that something you sort of fostered during this program? And then what was their sort of involvement in the program as well?
So, you know, the New York is a lot different than Portland, and in good ways, and in other maybe not so good ways. Like I think there's a lot of things that we could benefit from if we were sitting in New York City. But Portland is very unique, like I said at the beginning, and I think that, you know, word travels fast. Like the film community here in Portland is very small. So when you say you're going to do something as ambitious as we're going to do, I think people are like, all right, how can, you know, and then when they see nothing wrong with it, or when they see that there's maybe it aligns with, you know, something that they're doing, I think that those lines of communication open, you know, and the Portland Film Office has been helpful to kind of, everyone's sort of keeping an eye on things to see where they can support, which is really, really great. But that relationship is, I think it's been there from the beginning, but as we started to sort of say what we were going to do and make announcements of what we were going to do, I think that both, you know, I think the reputation of Open Signal, you know, myself and other people to sort of get things done, I think made people say, all right, well, you know, it's worth maybe investing in looking at how to support them.
And were they any help in like sort of helping find partnerships?
Yeah, I think, yeah, and I think I'm thinking of one person in particular, but I think, again, because this is a pilot year, this is still like, all right, well, what are they doing? I think now after the screen, people are like, okay, I see what they're doing. And I think that, you know, say what you will about, you know, the works in progress there, but I think that people were like, oh, they're serious. And I think we're hoping that the momentum can both inspire the filmmakers who were there, because they were able to see that people were valuing their content. And it's like, oh wow, this is something people actually want to see. I mean, we beat Godzilla that night because, I mean, there was it was crazy. But I think that also becomes, I don't want to say dangerous, but I don't want to yet at this particular point become beholden to other people's expectations. So I'm careful, and it's hard to say to share the success. But I think it will result in people being like, I want to be a part of something that is going to both change the film industry, both locally and potentially nationally. Like everybody wants to get on board with that, right? So I think at this point, we're seeing as a very viable entry into the area of sort of creating equity, both here in Portland and potentially influencing other people nationwide. Yes?
I was curious, I know it's your pilot year, but how are you looking to build any kind of mentoring into this so that the fellows themselves then connect with maybe some of the other public access producers at Open Signal as a way of kind of helping like lift them up and maybe get to them to a place where they would be, you know, at a level of storytelling that could get them.
Yeah, absolutely. So mentoring was actually built into the fellowship pilot year, and it still is. In fact, we're looking at trying to figure out how to expand and refine that relationship. I don't think it was as effective in this sort of pilot year as I wanted it to be for various different reasons. But I think that makes me even want to sort of double down on that idea. Not only will we sort of continue to work with mentors within the community, but outside. I had a chance to go to Sundance last winter, I think it was, and when I was there, there's black people making films everywhere, and you know, in one way or another. And I think finding those connections, not just within our own community, but to make connections with people in Baltimore and in Philly and all these different places to sort of come and be like, hey, how can I help you do? How can I not only help you do what you're doing, but how can you help me do what I'm doing? Because I think we do have some unique resources here, and I think that creating those connections is very much a part of what we're doing. And did we operationalize around that as effectively as we could in this pilot year? I don't think so, but it is still very much on the forefront of what it is we're going to be doing. In fact, we also want to develop a community advisor, a set of advisors from the community and various other organizations, not just who are in the arts arena, but in other areas of both the public and private sector, in the arts community, to influence and create relationships around the work that's created in the fellowship as well. So some organizations that are culturally specific organizations that may have, arts and media needs, or, we can work with them to sort of figure out what their needs are and then to facilitate that as part of the curriculum too. Yes?
So what was the application process like?
Okay.
And then also, if there are classes taught at Portland, at your media center, if there are video production classes or already some sort of filmmaking classes, was there a specific interest in pulling some of the most successful students, encouraging them to apply for the program?
So there's a lot of answers to that question. The application, this year, there was no application. And I think that was a very, very good thing and a very, very bad thing. I think it was a good thing because I think the fellows that we got had such a broad and varied range of experience, both technical, emotional, and so on, that it was like throwing everything at me at the same time. And it was like, one of the biggest takeaways was like, we definitely got to have an application. We developed and drafted an application, but we wanted to get started quickly, and we were beholden to a certain amount of certain timelines. And also, applications are tricky, particularly in the African American community, because when people feel like they are unqualified, they don't apply. And I think sometimes people are qualified when they think that they're unqualified. And so I think that how we shape the application for next year is going to have all those different things in mind. There's a second part to your question.
Yeah, I was asking, being ignorant of the
Right.
rules, like if you teach classes specifically, towards video production or documentary filmmaking, was there?
So one of the prerequisites, in fact, what actually happened was, one of the early thoughts was, yes, we wanted to say, in order to be a part of this fellowship, you have to have taken Introduction to Filmmaking or Intro to Studio, whatever else. And that's still, I think, trying to figure out how to fit this fellowship into the sort of continuum of services that we offer as sort of like a capstone sort of idea was one thing that we're working on. But what ended up happening was the fellows sort of signed on board and then started taking classes, which was dope because it was like, all right, and this is also works to help sort of diversify our own producer community as well, because we have different, so exploring that relationship is interesting, but it was really great to have these folks in the building, which is hard too, because, well, that's a whole different conversation we should link in later. But yes, so the application is very critical, and we're thinking about that like yesterday and, for months about how to sort of make it so that we don't sort of scare people away. But I think initially the whole idea that we wanted this to be a relational kind of thing at first, trying to figure out how to maintain this sort of relationship model, I think is important in deploying the application.
That would be great to put on the.
Yes.
I guess my question is around are you the only sole person working on this project from an organizational standpoint, or do you have like a team of people working with you this, or is this like your only focus while you're in this organization?
It is my only focus at this point, and no, I'm not the only one working on it. I think I am the only. We have a part-time person, and Rebecca is our sort of fundraising person who is sort of most hands-on from the organization, but she has other things that she does too. One of the things that we learned and that we're working on now is like, we need more people. And because I'm like, right now I'm alive, but I'm dead. So that can't happen again. But again, it was a pilot, so we're learning these kind of things. And I think it's important to experiment. And I think right now, I think we made some, like I said before, we made some really strong connections with some folks at Sundance and people at POV and Firelight Media who are doing this kind of work. And sort of looking and sort of scanning people's Rolodex to find out, like, who are the people who are out there who can help support what it is we're doing out here, so we don't feel like we're isolated and all by ourselves. Because, being isolated in Portland as a black person is something that's real. And I think that even as a cohort, it's real. but again, like I said, there are other people out there who are doing stuff and can like, and one thing I realized is that like, oh, you're doing this? I'm like, come help me, or, you know, and so that's a big thing.
And how long would you be around, like, after, like, I know I fly on Friday, so are you around to have, like, some private?
I have an 8-month-old, but I'm around. I mean, yeah. That's one thing that's great, and I think, you know, I've worked in Brooklyn for a long time.
I'm in Philly.
I was looking at the brick. Oh, okay. And I worked in Philly for a while too, and I love, like, Philly's one of my favorite places in the world. It is actually the reason, 'cause I went to the Black Star Film Festival for a number of different years, and I was like, we got to do this back home. And I think it's going on, no, it's August, I think, this year, right? First week, who said that? Okay, yeah, so like, I went to that film festival and a couple other film festivals, and I was like, there are Black creative communities everywhere that are strong. And not just Black creative communities, Black creative filmmaking communities. And I was like, wow, like, I want that. And at that point, I was, you know, I was out in Philly for like, I think it was 2.5 years, maybe longer than that. And I was out there temporarily knowing I was going to come back. And I was like, I didn't want to leave that. I was like, this is warm. And so, so I was like, all right, well, we gotta make it. And the thing is, like, again, once we said we were going to do it and started talking about it and doing things about it, people started coming to us. Like, Black people were like, hey, can you help me with this? And I'm like, yeah. Can I be a part of this? I'm like, yeah. I didn't want to turn people away. I was like, and right now, like, and that's one thing I was talking to Tim Williams like earlier. I was like, we did so much other stuff that we didn't show at Hollywood. When people were like, hey, I need help with this. Can you shoot this for me? And I'm like, yeah. So I would go out and I would shoot this thing with, you know, this dude who's running basketball camps. Or, you know, I go out up to Seattle and film this thing up in Seattle with this artist who's blowing up, you know. And we didn't show any of that stuff. But I don't know what my point is. I'm lost. Sorry.
I get to say you had an 8-month-old.
Yeah, I got 8 months old. Yes.
We have like 5 minutes left, so if you want to wrap up your questions, because we have to get to the award lunch. So.
Oh, yeah, award lunch. Yes.
Thank you, Barb. So my question is, what was your senior project coming out of Hampshire? How did it help you to get to where you are today with you?
Oh, man, Hampshire. You guys know about Hampshire, right? It was in the news recently because they're running out of money, right? Hampshire was like amazing for me in the years before and after. I made a film about a lawyer who traveled to upstate New York to work on a case, only to find out that sort of halfway through it was a cliffhanger, and he finds out that he had died in a car accident before. And then that's kind of like the premise of Sixth Sense, right? Same year it came out. I was like, damn. But the more interesting thing about Hampshire was that I had the chance to, that's where sort of documentary filmmaking sort of came in. Like, I was challenged. Like, I wanted to make big budget films and all that kind of thing. But it was also around that time there were a couple of films that came out that sort of shook me from the narrative nonfiction stuff and said I want to tell stories. And one of them was Beloved, that was directed by Jonathan Demme. And I actually got to meet and talk with Jonathan Demme because we screened a 35mm print of it, and I got to project this film, and I watched it. And in talking with Jonathan Demme told me one thing. He said, I didn't direct this movie. He said, the people who were acting in this movie, Danny Glover, Thandie Newton, Oprah Winfrey, he said, I just signed on to this film so we could get made. And he signed on to direct this movie just so that it could get made. And then he said, like, and at that point, it hurt, it almost like broke my heart in a weird way. Because I touched this film, like I held the celluloid, and I was like, I saw, like it brings tears to my eyes. But I knew that shouldn't be the way that Black people have to tell their stories. And he knew it too, but he did it intentionally. And when he died, it really like shook me up. Because I had that moment with him, and I don't know if he told anyone that before. He never did interviews about it, but like he really sort of took a back seat to directing that film and let it tell its own story. And I think that's a vital point so it's one of the pivotal reasons why I think I want to do what I do. if that makes any sense. So that's part of Hampshire for me. It is still there. It'll be all right. It'll be all right. I got to make a couple of films, make some money, and then give it to them. Maybe.
Thank you very much. And where is the attendance sheet at?
Yeah, man.